All right, welcome. We got some folks joining us here. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. As we are getting started here and as people are joining us, just introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know that you can hear us okay. Like I said, we are going to get started here pretty soon. If you have never been to a MinneAMA before, welcome. I'll tell you a little bit about that, and then we'll get it kicked off with some of our incredible panelists that we have here today with us. So MinneAMA is, if you're familiar with AMAs, or Ask Me Anything style sessions. We run these twice monthly, and they're an educational series where we sit down with subject matter experts and get a chance to answer your questions in real time. Oh, Mike, hello, welcome. I am Maria Ploessl. I'm the executive director of MinneStar. If you're not familiar, MinneStar is the nonprofit community organization that is built here in Minnesota to nurture and engage those interested in technology through meaningful connection. So how do we do that? We're the organizers of some of the largest gatherings that bring together Minnesota's technology community, such as Minnebar, which is the nation's largest and longest running tech conference. We run Mini Demo, which is essentially like a geek show and tell. We just had one a couple weeks ago, right, Antoinette? It was at it was virtual. We also had a drive-in experience at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. That was super fun. We run Back to Campus, which is a mini demo style, which showcases student tech talent, and this, which is MinneAMA. So like I said, introduce yourselves in the chat. You have the option to chat everyone in the group. You also have the option to message just the panelists, so you can select whichever one you want there. One thing to note before I kind of kick it over and introduce our incredible panelists we have today, we will be recording this, so if you're coming in late, if you have to leave early, no worries. We will be capturing it and we will share it out with all of you who are attending later on. So like I said, this month we're really excited to be talking Kubernetes. We have Andy Domeyer, who's the Senior Director of Technology at SPS Commerce. We have Matt Walburn. He is the Senior Director of Product Development at SPS. And our incredible moderator, Antoinette Smith, who is a MinneStar board member and also Engineering Manager at ActBlue. So I'm going to kick it over to them, and we're going to start diving into this awesome discussion. One thing to note, that chat is available to you to ask your questions at any time. So we are going to be kind of going through your questions. You can do it anonymously to just the panelists. You can ask them with, the entire group. But do please put your questions in the chat for the folks, and then Antoinette will be asking them as we go. All right, I'm going to kick it over to you, Antoinette.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, so welcome everyone. Like Maria said, I'm Antoinette Smith. I'm currently an engineering manager at an organization called ActBlue. Prior to this, I was engineering manager at an organization called Glitch, where I was leading the ops team, and we did some container orchestration, not with Kubernetes, but with Docker. So I'm super excited to hear about SPS Commerce's journey and what they have to share. So I'll kick it off to Andy.
Hi, thanks. Hi, everyone. Andy Domeyer. I've been with SPS Commerce for almost 16 years now. It's been a crazy ride. I was around the 80th employee when I started, and we went public in 2010. We're close to 2,000 employees, I think, now, or just shy of that. And growing like crazy, moved to the cloud, had to figure out this whole container thing, had to figure out how to orchestrate all these containers and herd them, and also not blow the AWS budget out of the water while we're trying to make sense of all that. So it's been a lot of fun growth problem solving for me along the way, and fun to just get together and chat about it and share some of our learnings.
Sweet. And now Matt.
Sure. So Matt Walburn, Senior Director of Platform Services. And that's fancy words for all of the back-end data processing, APIs, et cetera, that really power the core of our business, as well as our front-end customer-facing user experiences. And kind of on the opposite end of Andy, I've only been with SPS for 6 months, so kind of stepping into the tornado that's been growing over the last many years. But joined, 6 months ago, came over from AWS, and prior from that, I was with Pivotal. And prior to that, I actually spent 12 years at Target. So kind of coming full circle back into retail technology.
Awesome. That's really cool to have both of your varied experiences. All right. So for all of you that are watching, I have some preset questions that I can ask the panelists. But what we'd really like is for you to put into the chat, like anything that comes to mind, any question, no matter how big or small. But I will go ahead and kick us off with the first question, which is, what is Kubernetes and why does it matter? Andy.
Oh, man. All right. Oh, man, you picked me. I do the short straw. All right. It's a really cool tech that everyone talks about. No, I'm just kidding. It's been interesting. I don't know how much to go into some of the history of the container orchestration platforms and where it has all kind of evolved from. But ultimately, really gained its roots on helping organizations orchestrate containers. And if you're in that ecosystem, if you're running containers today, one of the things that you recognize is that you have to have some really intelligent scheduling that helps you make sense around how many you need to be running, when should you scale them, how do you deploy new ones, how do you route traffic to all these things. And then as you get into that space, there's so many aspects of this ecosystem that can really be accelerators for your business, whether it's how do you deploy these repeatably, how do you monitor for them, what type of security do you want in your infrastructure. And so while Kubernetes is a really important technology, especially for orchestrating containers, one of the most important and valuable things that I have seen happen in the technology industry is it's really about the entire ecosystem. If you look up CNCF or Cloud Native Compute Foundation, I think it's just cncf.org. They've really kind of taken the helm in terms of trying to orchestrate and maintain this ecosystem in a way that the technology industry is really working together to create all these tools that work in unison. But ultimately, you have to have a platform that they all work to. You can't necessarily create all these tools and have the platform on the back end be very open-ended and opinionated, make it work for Kube, make it work for Mesos, make it work for Nomad, make it work for Docker Swarm. You lose a lot of efficiencies that way.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, Matt?
No, I mean, we could go into the kind of detailed responsibilities of Kubernetes, but yeah, it's really I was going to say it's a platform, but generally it's part of a platform, right? It's the piece of a platform, like an engineering platform that would be used to manage the deployment and scheduling of your containers onto, multiple compute hosts. It's going to help manage your networking, your security, your access controls, et cetera. And just makes the management of large fleets of Docker containers much more manageable.
Okay, so we got a few questions. First one, which I'm sure you've probably gotten a lot, is what is the difference between Kubernetes and Docker? Let's start with Matt.
Sure. Yeah, so I think I kind of covered it a little bit with my previous response, but Docker is really the packaging format that is kind of the de facto packaging format for containers at this point. And so Docker images are really your hermetically sealed kind of workload and runtime in a box that then needs to be deployed somewhere, right? And you could use Docker commands to spin up Docker containers on individual hosts. But usually people are deploying large numbers of Docker containers, and those containers may have interdependencies. Again, back to the networking and security pieces that I mentioned. So Kubernetes is really, like Andy said earlier, that kind of orchestration platform for deploying and managing large numbers of containers throughout their lifecycle.
Okay. I know, Andy, that you mentioned kind of a few ways that you might deploy containers that were not Kubernetes-based. But one question I have is Docker the only type of container one might have, or are there other types of containers that you might use with Kubernetes?
Oh, that's a fun question. I'm not totally sure the exact answer to that. It's possible. I think Rocket was one container tech at one point that was making some momentum or progress, but Docker has been so far ahead. I think something that is super important and interesting to think about in this space is to really pay attention to what the technology industry's trends are. So Docker is far and away the container technology that's adopted by the industry, and so I'm not saying that you shouldn't do your research and just validate that some of these technologies may or may not be the right ones for you. But I think in general, it's really important when you get into this ecosystem and into this space that you take the time to look at what's most widely adopted and why, because there's usually a ton of great reasons. Don't reinvent the wheel on a lot of this stuff. Leverage the community, get back to the community when you can. But ultimately, like if you find yourself as an organization thinking about maybe going against the trend in some of those areas, just recognize you're probably not going to hire folks with experience if you're looking at technologies that are outside of some of the standards. And so I think that's a really long-winded way of saying I don't know of anything other than Docker that Kubernetes orchestrates, and I would be surprised if the general tech community tries to optimize for anything outside of Docker.
Okay. So next question from the community is Kubernetes only for servers, or can it be utilized on smaller embedded devices?
I know of one story where I believe it's Chick-fil-A has like this really weird rollout of their of the worker nodes inside Kube that are running like inside their stores, but they all report back to a master cluster. It's kind of an interesting story, and they do all sorts of crazy things like monitor fridge temps and different things like that. But I think in general, the idea is that Kubernetes, the idea is the Kubernetes worker nodes and the Kubernetes ecosystem is trying to create an interface for you to interface with your compute in a much more direct and consistent way. So the way to think about it is if you're trying to run a compute platform, you could probably run it on a lot of different things, but you're going to want to optimize for what your workloads look like, and a lot of times that's just the size of your servers are gonna and the amount of compute demand that you have for the type of workloads is really going to drive that. I struggle to think of use cases maybe where you'd want to try to get into something more mobile, or like if you're trying to use spare CPU cycles on all your employees' work devices or something like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I don't know. These aren't like my use cases aren't like production use cases, but I definitely have friends and colleagues that have built Kubernetes clusters running on like Raspberry Pis and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but as for like commercial like production applications of something like that, I'm sure that it's happening somewhere, right? If we've got people doing it in their basements and garages, I'm sure other people are trying that in production. So,
okay. All right, another question from the audience. Regarding Kubernetes and service mesh, is data plane tools enough? For example, Invoice Proxy, or is control plane tool like Istio also required?
Oh man.
Yeah.
That's a great question. You want to go first, Matt?
I can give an answer. It might not be a complete answer. The answer is I'll just tell you what we're doing, right? So within our platform, which yes, part of it is Kubernetes, but there's a lot of other things at work too. And we call our platform Dev Center because it's really the engineering platform for our SPS developers, is also the place where we publish APIs for public or external consumption. And within our Kubernetes clusters, we're running Istio, and that's to give us, a lot of the kind of service mesh benefits, things like dynamic tracing, things like improved security, things like improved networking. We see it as a pretty fundamental tool, especially when we're talking about high levels of multi-tenancy within Kubernetes clusters. It's been really key for us to be able to do that without losing our minds or having things get too unwieldy.
Yeah, I one thing that I would maybe just echo or add there is I think when you're looking at some of those solutions, I love that you said that you led the question with Envoy. I think that kind of ties back to that is, when you look at the adoption in the industry, that has definitely got a lot of momentum, and a lot of other organizations are building things around Envoy. But stay focused on like what outcomes you're trying to produce. Istio is a great tech. It can be super complex, and so if you don't need something that complex or with that much overhead, maybe just revisit like what exactly you're trying to solve, and just be careful not to over-engineer, because it's really easy to do that in this ecosystem.
All right. Next question. How big of a team do you have to build / maintain your Kubernetes cluster, and are you running local or in the cloud?
Not big enough. Just in case my team is watching, I better answer with that. We are running out in AWS. We have some workloads in Azure too, but they're not anything that we have really rallied a lot of production effort around to date. But it is nice to have that consistency across cloud platforms. We're not running anything inside any data centers right now. It's really nice to use the cloud provided managed services where you can. So using Amazon EKS and Azure's Kubernetes is a nice way to go.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that like Kubernetes can be pretty difficult if you're actually building and managing and running your own clusters yourself from the ground up. And that's one of the reasons that we went with EKS, because we do have a small team, in letting AWS do a lot of the actual like heavy lifting of cluster management and provisioning and all those things. Lets us focus on some of the other things that we want to do on top of Kubernetes, right? So having Istio in the mix, having a lot of our observability and telemetry things in the mix, as well as then extending some of the authorization and entitlements capabilities that we need in order to get that multi-tenancy and to be able to expose things publicly. So I would say, yeah, if you have the option to leverage more of a managed solution, especially if you have a small team, it's going to free up more capacity for you to do things on top of Kubernetes, which are probably the things that your customers in your business are probably looking more for anyways. Right.
I think just to not punt on the team size question too bad as well. I think I think it does, depending on how you're structured, it does kind of create some weird organizational boundaries that you should be really mindful about when you're thinking about who should operate the platform, and like what layers, like who owns like deployment to it, and who owns deployment tools or monitoring tools and those types of things. So it's very much an evolving thing at SPS as we bring on the different tech stacks. We're seeing things kind of start maybe in different teams, but over time start to make sense to centralize in our SRE team. And so our SRE team at SPS right now is only 8 folks, and they own a lot of stuff. So we definitely are consistently always revisiting that and trying to figure out what's the right mix, and when do we try to have better specialization. You're probably not going to just like fund a Kubernetes team with 4 to 6 engineers tomorrow, because if it doesn't exist today, it's not adding business value just yet. So you kind of have to think through, how do you like iteratively align some sort of growth in your organization to business value. Otherwise, it's hard to get there, right? Because you got to get things off the ground and have people to do that. But you have to find that balance. So it's different for everybody. Sorry that is kind of a ambiguous response, but it's pretty circumstantial.
So for SPS, when you first moved over to Kubernetes, like how long ago was that?
We're still moving.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah. Work in progress is a great way to put it. We've taken a strategic position in thinking about a lot of our foundational tech where, hey, the industry is moving and changing all the time. And whatever you do today in 3 years is likely going to be outdated. So you really have to be ready to evolve and be continuous. And don't always just do that for fun. Assume or aim for some business value or business outcomes. And in our case, we have evolved. We went from inside physical data centers. We first used Mesos and Marathon because it didn't require Docker containers, so we could just spin up JVMs and scale those and orchestrate those without having everybody containerize all their apps. That got us a long way, but we really started liking some of the ECS features and functions that Amazon was producing. So we started building more things out around that. And then in the last couple of years, really looked to be more API-centric in our development and found the Istio Kubernetes stack to be something that was going to help us get there. So we're in an evolution right now in process of looking at what things do we have running in ECS that make sense to be in Kubernetes. We've really moved completely away from the Mesos Marathon ecosystem. And we're learning every day things we gotta have to account for or build differently.
All right. Let's go to another question from the audience. So it says, my company uses Terraform for ops. Could you contrast that with Kubernetes in terms of advantages it might have?
So Terraform, I would, how would I articulate this? Terraform is much more like, we use Terraform at SPS to build the Kubernetes clusters. It's a great tech to help get the infrastructure built. So they work together. They're not necessarily like competitive, I guess, in terms of what they're trying to solve. So the way to maybe think about it is the Kubernetes infrastructure that you need built to run your clusters is something. Terraform is a tool that would help you build that. And Terraform actually works really well with Kube. Matt, do you have any other thoughts or things you'd add on that?
I was going to say the same thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I guess if anything, I was going to say that, yeah, I mean, extending that kind of infrastructure as code, mindset and paradigm that I'm assuming you're using Terraform for is completely compatible with how you set up and manage your Kubernetes clusters. So spot on with what Andy said.
All right. Okay, next question. Would it be wise to use Kubernetes with a Beowulf cluster?
I'll try to take this one because at one point I did manage large Beowulf clusters. I've got to imagine that you don't want to have two schedulers fighting over where to place workloads, right? So I've never tried to do it, but they're both attempts at some of the same things, right? So both Beowulf and Kubernetes are both trying to schedule jobs and workloads, respectively, to a common set of compute resources. So I can see lots of potential for them getting into race conditions and fights. But candidly, yeah, I haven't read up on whether or not that's possible. These are just kind of my gut level inferences.
All right. Sorry, I'm like reading this paragraph and trying to determine if it's a question. Maybe I'll just read it and then we'll see if a question is at the end of it. All right. OpenShift uses CRIO as the runtime versus Docker, but Docker files are still fully supported. OpenShift also has many use cases of clusters being run at the edge. Smaller 3-node clusters are currently supported, but 1-node clusters will be supported in the future. Not a question. Thanks, Dean. Okay. All right. Here is a question, though. Are you running just your Kubernetes masters using EKS or the entire clusters in EKS? Assuming you are using Prometheus for monitoring your Kubernetes cluster, how long is your data retention, and are you using something like M3 for longer retention analysis?
Oh man, there's so many good questions in that thread. I'll hit on a couple of the monitoring observability pieces. So definitely have Prometheus and Grafana at play. We also do use a couple other SaaS tools, Sumo Logic, Logic Monitor. And the advantage with the SaaS tools, it's a little easier for retention. And a lot of SaaS tools, this is actually a great example that I tie back to like industry trends and tech trends. A lot of these SaaS companies are going to build out tooling that aligns with tech trends. So you start to see, if you're using for logs, if you're using Sumo or Splunk or anything like that, you start to see them build services because the industry has really rallied around things like Kubernetes. So you start to get some benefits from these tools that you're already using, start to bring you new features and functions for tech you're trying to adopt. So that's been really helpful. We haven't really, because of that, we haven't had to worry about data retention times in Prometheus just yet. It's something we do expect to care more about as we continue to move workloads over. There are some workloads that we have a lot of seasonality in our data from week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter. So it is super helpful for some of the app level services to be able to look back at, what did this time of day last Monday look like for context if they're trying to figure out if things look weird or not. So we expect to tackle that, but we haven't had to yet. And a lot of that's thanks to our SaaS providers.
Just out of curiosity, one thing I've heard about using Prometheus and data retention is that you don't need data older than 14 days. Do you think that's true?
I personally don't. I have a lot of strong opinions, and I think maybe I think a lot of it depends on the nature of your business. You know, like for SPS growing like we are, and we're adding a lot of new connections to our network. Those new connections to our network can really change the patterns and behaviors of the different applications. If we get like a new traffic flow, or onboard a customer that's really high volume from a communications perspective. And I'm a huge believer that historical context is really, really valuable when you're trying to understand a problem, whether it's in the middle of an incident or, hey, like you haven't deployed a new version of your app for a month. Is it better or worse than it was, the last time you deployed? How do you go back and look at some of that data? If you don't have it anywhere else, it is really helpful to have for more than 2 weeks, in my opinion, because that's super valuable context to build. Like, what did end of month look like for you last year, or last month, if your business is really big based on that. So,
yeah, I was going to say, just like another like tangible thing for us is having that historical data has brought a lot of illumination to the fact that what used to look like our like peak season, around the holidays, Cyber Monday, Black Friday, things like that. Given that everybody's at home and not going places and doing more shopping online, like we're able to actually see that what used to be normal for Cyber Week is now kind of business as usual most of the year, right? And being able to have that historical data has allowed us to plan and re-architect and re-engineer in ways to respond to this new normal that might not have been as easy if we didn't have all of that historical data.
Cool. And then someone just posted that if it helps, Thanos is a great but exceptionally complex way to increase data retention in Prometheus. So thanks, Ben, for that. Yep. All right, next question from the audience. What are good and bad workloads for Kubernetes?
I think at least one that we grapple with a lot at SPS that's important to maybe think through is what are you comfortable with in terms of disruption in your services? If you have long running workloads, depending on how you're set up, that can be really tricky. So like, for example, at SPS, we try to use a lot of spot instance workloads so that our compute can be as cheap as possible on our Kubernetes clusters. But if you're running spot instances, there are scenarios where you're told you have 2 minutes to vacate that compute and Amazon's going to take it away from you. So if you have, request timeouts or applications that, take 15 minutes to complete what they're trying to do and can't handle disruption, that you're not architected well to help facilitate that. So there is a lot of things like that where I think you can do a lot of designing your cluster for what your workloads are. So it may be a different question of like, what are your workloads? Not that they have to be bad. I think long running is harder, but it doesn't mean you can't design your cluster to work with that. I don't know, Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, I know a lot of work and a lot of advancements have happened in Kubernetes over the last couple of years as far as stateful workloads go. I think what Andy's getting at is that we're primarily running stateless workloads on Kubernetes with their backing stores or their persistent stores being something like a more traditional, or I shouldn't say more traditional, but more of a stateful managed service from AWS, right? So think things like RDS or Aurora or Dynamo. I don't believe we're running any stateful applications for all of the reasons that Andy mentioned. That said, I know that people do, right? So there have been a lot of advancements in running stateful workloads on Kubernetes. It's just for our use cases so far, we haven't seen a big need to do that.
I would just latch onto that last point. Like Kubernetes is a really great tech and a really great ecosystem, but like, don't just do Kubernetes to do Kubernetes. Like, what are you solving? Like, and really think about the business problem, because it doesn't necessarily mean that Kubernetes is the answer. If you've got really long running workloads or stateful workloads, maybe it is for some reason, but start with what you're solving, and go from there.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say that. Sorry, I know you probably want to read the next question, but it ties.
Oh no, it's fine. Go for it. No, I want to hear what you were gonna say.
Oh, I was just like, so Mike in the chat had a question about containerizing monolith apps, coming from a mainframe. Is it worth the time and effort, too much risk, et cetera? And it kind of goes back to what Andy was just saying, but I would say, I think there's a lot of value in reducing the number of platforms and kind of the cognitive load of having to manage and operate multiple platforms. So that could be a benefit of containerizing a mainframe app, is that now you're all of a sudden on the same runtime, the same platform, the same kind of operational concerns as the rest of your workloads. I would also say that being in containers and being on an orchestration platform would probably help you refactor and decompose that workload, iteratively over time, if that's something that you're shooting for, right? Just because containers and Kubernetes provide, I think, a lot more velocity and remove a lot of the friction for deployment, which makes things like, iterative decomposing those old mainframe workloads a bit more tenable.
All right, so there are no other questions from the audience at this time. You did get a thank you, though, for your response. So let's see. Well, we have, what has been your experience with Kubernetes, and what lessons have you learned along the way?
So many. This could be like the rest of the afternoon. I think some of the biggest things from my perspective is that you can move faster if you do start with the perspective of, hey, we're gonna by default review and assume when we're trying to problem solve something, look at like what has industry momentum as a starting spot when you're solutioning, as opposed to trying to reinvent too many things internally. But that being said, like I'm a broken record about it, but keep top of mind what business problems you're solving. Like that, it is so important to do that, because this ecosystem is really easy. There's a lot of really cool tech, but it doesn't necessarily mean all that cool tech is of business value. Even though it looks great on paper, it's pretty easy to look at something and say, well, if we spend the next 3 months doing this thing, then we'd have this thing and we could do other stuff. But if nobody's planning to use it, it's kind of throwaway work. So that's been a huge thing for us, is to just understand what value are we trying to bring back to the organization, and what's that boundary of what things can we do that's going to make the rest of our development team more efficient and more effective. Those are really the things we try to key in on when we're taking platform level stuff. And then Matt, I'd defer to you on going into detail, but I think one of the things that you've brought to SPS since you joined is really helping the organization more effectively approach. This is a big change. This isn't just a change to the underlying container orchestration tech. It's maybe a change to how you architect software. It's a change to how you monitor some of the things that you build. And you've done a great job of kind of bringing us along that journey of just saying, like, this change management event is just bigger than a couple technology projects. Mm-hmm. I think that's been a huge learning for me, if you want to chat about that a bit.
Yeah, sure. And that actually pairs off what I was thinking, which is like my experience with Kubernetes, and this is probably not, I don't know if this is a direct answer, but what I've learned is that Kubernetes isn't enough by itself, right? And I think I said at the beginning, like, Kubernetes, like, you really should be thought of as being part of a platform, not necessarily the platform itself, right? And that's why, like we mentioned earlier, we've had to build observability and monitoring on top of this. We've had to build developer workflow around things like continuous integration, continuous deployment, those sorts of things on top of it. And then just tools to help make people getting on board the platform easier, right? Because developers, at least our developers, don't really want to have to learn how to write Kubernetes manifests and all these other things to be able to get on the platform. So you really need to simplify. If you're looking for large scale adoption within your company, you need to make that experience of switching as simple and as elegant as possible, and really try to shield the developers from having to take on all of the implementation details on how to necessarily use Kubernetes, right? Like we want them to get the value of being on Kubernetes, but without having to bear the burden of knowing every last little implementation detail about it. That said, Andy's point is spot on, right? Like in moving from ECS to Kubernetes, we're also moving to different tools for monitoring and logging, different tools for how we do deployment, different tools for how we do provisioning. And you really shouldn't underestimate, call it org change management, call it organizational selling, whatever words you want to use to make sure that you're really clear on what value that you're bringing to the development community by introducing this new platform, and then also what value are you bringing to your company by implementing this new platform. Because you really need both of those things in order to incentivize both the engineers as well as the business, right? The engineers to make the move and the business to pay for it to be successful. So there's just a lot of things that definitely need to be considered when making a move like this.
Cool. Both of you have talked a lot about like the business value being brought by switching over from whatever your existing platform is to a new one like Kubernetes. I was curious, do any of you either one of you off the top of your head, like, can you think of like one kind of like story of something that like you can show that Kubernetes was able to help you with some sort of business goal or bring value?
Yeah. I jump on that one a little bit. So one of the things that we are trying to turn the corner on at SPS with our technology stack is kind of the idea that the way we talk about it is open the network. So we're a big communications network for retail supply chain data, and we've spent 20 years building this network, and there's a ton of value inside the network. And we're really to a point now as an organization where a platform and open aspects to our network are something that are really valuable to folks outside of our company in ways that we can't even think of yet. So being able to really open our platform up with APIs and start to let the kind of the world and the ecosystem around us start to leverage our platform in new and different ways is something that we see as really strategic to how we continue to grow as a business. And when you start to think about that, like if you start to think about like opening up like pathways into your platform to get into some of these things that are really proprietary, you have to start thinking about things like authorization and authentication a lot differently. You have to start thinking about things like usage tracking and understanding like really basic API gateway stuff, like who's accessing this stuff? Should they be accessing this stuff? Should we be billing them for this access? And then also like, holy cow, this person that's trying to access these things must be running this from a serverless function, and 5,000 calls at a time are coming in, and it's exceeding our capacity. And so we've had some really early wins with taking some of the proprietary things that we've done as an organization and making them available via APIs to the world, and doing that in a controlled way where we feel pretty good that we've got things like rate limiting in place, or have an opportunity to have a better story around rate limiting, and doing that in a way that we can give everybody a consistent feature function set around that. So I do think we're in the early phases where like your question's awesome, because we're in that early awkward phase where it's like a lot of the value propositions that we have and the direction we have are written down and they make sense, and like the vision is making sense. But some of the scale that we expect to really see that business value from, we haven't gotten to yet. And so it's a great question, because everybody like depending on what stage you're at, everyone kind of grapples with that problem differently, because we're at that stage where it's like, it's there, it feels tangible, we're seeing some of it so far, but we really think the big wins are probably 12 months out yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Let's go to the next question. How often do you evaluate your Kubernetes related spends and decide to use managed versus self-managed?
Oh, Matt, this question was made for you, buddy.
Never. No, actually, I feel like it's probably better for Andy, because he runs our continuous improvement team, which monitors things like utilization and capacity and spend and all of these things. Yeah.
I think in general, like and if you're really focused on the business problem side of things, in general, you should always look at managed from the start. And a lot of times, at least for us, the decision-making process when we're looking at managed versus something else is, what's the business value and does it justify the spend? In some cases, it doesn't justify the spend, but it's still a good idea. And so we start some engineering around those things, whether it's bringing in some open source tools or something from like the CNCF ecosystem. In other scenarios, if we think it's really fundamental, ideally we can really go to bat and make sure that there's funding for those things. And then in general, though, like this is just my opinion. I think that lots of people have lots of opinions, and none of them are wrong in this space. Which is, once you go a route, in some of these different platform tech, that decisions that you make, it can be really hard to change. And when I say hard, I mean expensive. We got lots of us have really talented engineering teams. It's just a matter of what's the best thing to focus on with our time. And a lot of times it isn't necessarily reworking a solution that works well for you today. So at least the way that I like to look at it is I like to look at it as managed first, because I don't want to have to switch to managed later when there's enough value for us to do that. But that's not always how it works.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that too, that my position is probably why Andy teed it off to me at the beginning, is like, at least my perspective is that your engineers are going to be, or should be, your most valuable resource, and they're probably also your scarcest resource, right? So you want them solving your hardest problems, which typically means, hey, if there's a managed service and it meets my requirements, let's use that thing so that I'm not leveraging my scarce engineering capacity to solve problems that have already been solved by a provider, right? So that's sort of our mentality. But to Andy's point, when we see gaps, well, then we're going to determine what's the business value of filling that gap. And if there isn't a solution that really meets our needs, then that might be a place where we do something ourselves. I think the other thing I would say is, just as part of the way that we run our product and service teams at SPS, each one of those teams is accountable for financial management of the cost of running their solution. So we're constantly, we're looking at it at a macro level, but each team is also on the hook for making sure that they're being as financially responsible in the way that they're running their services as possible, right? So to try to minimize some of the gold plating and overscaling and leaving things running that aren't being used. And I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but we use a lot of mechanisms to stay on top of this.
Well, a slight detour. I'm curious, when you talk about managing the cost, like, do you have a tool that you use to like make those for each department to make those reports? Or like, I know that it can be challenging. So I was just curious.
Yeah. I could talk for hours on this. So if you want to chat again later, I'd love to. This is a really fun space for me. So Matt was referring to a team in my org. They're continuous improvement managers, and where we've taken things at SPS is we've really organized around this idea of trying to make sure that we can be really explicit at understanding each service. So we create a unique service ID for the services that we build at SPS. And then as best we can, and we're still always working to improve this, but as best we can, we label Docker containers with that service ID. We label AWS resources with tags for that service ID. And then we also connect that back to things like the log groups it's in and things like that. And so, whether you're using like something like AWS's cost tools, we use those, and we use Cloud Health. But what we end up doing is having to export that into a different reporting tool, because we like to put our availability data next to our alert data, next to our change management data and incident data and cost data, so that we can put together a report that what we call it is a confidence report that just shows like what's the confidence level we have in these different services, and like performance to cost is one of the things that comes out there. But it is complicated, because like an example, just real quickly, is if you're running a compute cluster, one of the things we try to do is say, okay, well, SRE is in charge of this compute cluster, but really the cost of it, you slice out based on the different containers that are running on it, and that could be a lot of different teams that are running those containers. But we also try to maintain a certain amount of compute overhead or idle compute, so that when things need to scale up and down, there is some compute available. You don't have to wait for EC2 instance to spin up and get loaded and all of those kinds of things. And so we want to account for that cost as maybe something that SRE cares about, because we want to incentivize them to have as efficient of scaling concepts as possible, which is a little different than like, hey, Antoinette, here's your service. You were running 5 containers on average throughout these days, and what we do is calculate like a runtime of our compute based on memory. So we'd say like, here was your container memory configuration, and on average you were running this many per hour. So this is your ballpark cost.
Mhm.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I would like to hear more about it. Okay. Next question from the audience though. Is your configuration compiled in, or is it deployed separately, i.e. immutable containers versus mutable config maps?
Mhm.
I should have expected a question like that from you, Ben. Yeah. I think right now a lot of our configuration is going with the container, and I think that's pretty representative of how we got to where we are. A lot of the services we had were JVMs from back in the day, and we've evolved and iterated them over time. And so I don't know that I would say, if you're going to start today, how would you do it? I don't know if we would choose to do it that way or not, but it's part of the evolution process, and we do revisit that occasionally. But for right now, we haven't seen a significant need to approach that differently.
As I say, I'd answer that totally differently, so maybe that's funny. Yeah, I'm a big 12-factor app fan, and I'm a big fan of having a consistent artifact that you're promoting through different environments, and relying on whether it's config maps or environment variables or some sort of config service or repository, of externalizing that configuration as much as possible, so that you're truly testing the artifact as it moves through, and you're not getting tripped up by discrepancies in the configuration. So I'm sure that's something Andy and I will work on going forward, and seeing if that's something we can introduce. But yeah, I wouldn't say that's applied consistently right now.
All right. Next question from the audience. Any interesting failures or horror stories from running Kubernetes in production?
I think thankfully right now we don't have anything that has been massive. I think we've uncovered a few things in terms of circular dependencies with the way that we have chosen to do deployments, and the way some of our deployment tools have had dependencies on things that are tied to our authentication and identity services internally, which then if they're on the clusters that aren't healthy and you're trying to do deployments to fix the things that aren't healthy, things can get a bit funky there. But we haven't had anything too crazy yet. I think one of the things we're trying to keep an eye on, we prefer to maintain some compute density, and we like having a more multi-tenant approach to our clusters. So kind of having all the services in one place is going to set us up over time for increased risk there. So we are thinking about honestly, 2-3 years from now, where do we maybe want to be? And there's probably some hidden risk in there, and thinking about how should we really separate that. But we also don't think the right answer is to run 20 clusters for lots of different reasons there. So thinking ahead and listening to and learning from other people's failures is always a great way to go about it. I wish I had actually, no, I don't wish I had a more interesting story. I'm glad we don't have anything too interesting to share yet.
I feel like Matt might have some stories.
Not at SPS. No.
Yeah, elsewhere.
Yeah, but they were more early days, right? The way Kubernetes has matured over the last couple of years, I haven't seen a lot of those lately. Yeah, early on when people were just learning how to build clusters and there weren't as many advanced features, definitely had some cases where entire clusters went down, or you got into a ping pong kind of scaling race, right? Of scaling containers on Kubernetes. But no, over the last couple of years, things have settled down quite a bit.
Okay.
It does. Just one point, somebody brought up Envoy, and we talked about Istio a little bit. If I had to pick something that your control plane and your ingress egress, whatever your strategy is there, those are the things that honestly keep me up the most at night, because that is like one central place that, if that's not working well, that definitely like everything is in a lot of trouble. So.
Okay. Next question. Oh, sorry. Was someone? Oh, okay. Cool. Do you see any cost savings when you compare hosting an application or service in Kubernetes versus VMs?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is specific to Kubernetes. I mean, it's more of a general, I think, moving from VMs to containers definitely lets you pack a lot more workload density into a smaller compute footprint. I think Kubernetes makes managing that a whole lot easier, right? But I do think you're definitely going to get a lot of cost efficiencies by moving to containers and packing those things, efficiently. And I know that was one of the big reasons, and Andy can speak to it, that we initially were looking at ECS was to get that increased compute density. And that's a benefit that we expect to carry over as we move to Kubernetes.
Yeah, it really lets you separate the application concerns from the infrastructure concerns. And that separation is great, because then you can really work on optimizing your infrastructure and solving the problems your infrastructure needs to service for the Kubernetes platform instead of for 18 different apps. And then the Kubernetes platform worries about the application level. So like I said, we have a really good mix in terms of how we manage the infrastructure costs. We have a certain percent of our compute in production that we run on instances that are covered by savings plans. So we just say, hey, we know we're always going to need a certain amount of compute. So we cover that by like reserved instance or savings plans to get better price rates. But then use the spot market as much as possible. And that's really let the SRE team focus in on like, what's the right instance types? How do we optimize this infrastructure? And then how do we write automation around the spot instance ecosystem to scale up and scale down with that data? So you really get to optimize your infrastructure a lot this way. It's great.
All right. So there are no attendee questions, but we can probably take attendee questions probably for the next 5 minutes. So if anyone has anything, please put it in the chat. I did have a question. Andy, you mentioned that you deploy to AWS primarily, but you've also deployed to Azure, which is funny because like Google created Kubernetes, but you didn't mention Google Cloud providers. So I'm just curious about the story there, if any.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. A lot of it for us was there's business value. So the way that we tend to think about our cloud strategy right now is we are AWS first. We see them as the leader in the cloud space in terms of services they offer and the velocity in which they bring new things to market. And so we see that partnership being something that is a technical advantage for us. But that doesn't mean that both other providers, like I think if you look at Google, if we had a really meaningful need for something like BigQuery, they're the clear winner in that space, and that would make a lot of sense for us to think about workloads there. In the Microsoft ecosystem, there are some being in the retail space, there are some retailer-friendly reasons to be over there, and so that is a lot of where there are things over there. It's not part of our strategy to necessarily be like, you could run your stuff in any cloud. It's more like there's a reason to be here. The other a really interesting one is if you think about maybe some of your enterprise licensing. Most people have a lot with places like Microsoft. SQL Server licensing discussions. Microsoft's doing some interesting things there where you can potentially take some of that operational expense of your license and support and maintenance fees and repurpose them into cloud computing credits. And so things like that maybe give you another like business reason to be over there. But I wouldn't put what we're doing out over there like on a pedestal as something that's going great right now. It's just definitely like, we're not afraid to do that when there's business need for it, and recognize there will be more over time, but balancing that investment is kind of an ongoing battle for us.
Okay. All right.
Was that Antoinette, was that sort of just reading between the lines there, like was that kind of a, hey, are you using Kubernetes as kind of a bridge to multi-cloud, that sort of thing, and running workloads across cloud providers? Or
yeah, I mean, it wasn't specifically a bridge there, but it is a question that I had. I know that people talk about being able to use Kubernetes so that you can be a multi-cloud provider, but I am curious about like, is that really like is it as easy as that, or like is there more to it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a whole lot. There's a whole lot that goes into getting you to the point where you have Kubernetes clusters running the way that your company wants them run on both clouds. And that's, to some extent, that's the full operationalization, for lack of a better word, of multiple cloud providers, which is why that can be a pretty big lift, right? And that's why why Andy says we're AWS first, but we do have a few use cases for Azure. And I had another thought there, but I forgot it. So.
I jump in just real quick on that. So somebody brought up Terraform earlier. That is an area where Terraform really shines, is be able to go across clouds and not have to introduce a ton of different tools. CloudFormation is really powerful inside AWS. But the one thing that, whether it's Terraform or CloudFormation or whatever you're thinking about there, one aspect of running Kubernetes in the cloud is you're typically, I mean, sometimes you are, but you're not always just like deploying a container. There's usually other resources, whether it's a database or backend storage like S3 or something like that. And so you still, if you're thinking about like CI/CD and deployment, there's still a cloud provider interface story there that you have to answer for, right? Like, this person's deploying an API, sure, but what database does that API talk to? Is that an RDS instance? Is that a SQL server? So don't like like Matt said earlier, like Kubernetes is just a piece of that puzzle, right? And there's so many other things that go with it. And that is where like something like Terraform is great, because you can talk to Kubernetes and get some of that infrastructure built, but also talk to cloud provider ecosystems too, and give folks their S3 buckets and that kind of stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we have go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Last thing I was going to mention there, just because it's, I think it's pretty interesting, a little unique, is we actually do a lot of build deploy on Azure, right? Like using the Azure DevOps platform. And we actually use that to build and deploy artifacts to our Kubernetes clusters running in AWS. So we found that platform to be really, really helpful for our developers. It just so happens that it runs in Azure, right? But
cool. That's awesome. All right. It's funny. I'm just as an aside, I do find the Azure like interface like a lot more intuitive than like AWS's. You're just like,
Yep.
Last question. You mentioned Istio for service-to-service communication. Are you using Kubernetes to facilitate event-driven architecture as well? And what do you use for API management?
That's a consistently evolving story. We like a lot of the API gateway tech that we have right now. A lot of that is stuff that we've built. We revisit that relatively frequently. I think we feel like a lot of times we tend to be in a good way on the front end of some problems where maybe the service providers aren't quite where we need it to be, so we end up building a few things ourselves. So for some of the API management, that's a lot of the Dev Center platform that Matt was talking about. There's a lot of proprietary stuff we've done around that, and we love event-driven architecture, but we do kind of have the scale as an organization too, where we kind of know there's going to be a consistent amount of load. So we do have a decent amount of serverless stuff running. We have a lot of Lambda running, and we get a lot of value out of that. But we definitely see, like, if you have services that, like, there may be event driven, but at some point, like, there's usually a tipping point where, like, if these Lambda functions, if like a certain amount of them are always running all the time anyway, it is helpful to revisit maybe your architecture on that and think about containerizing that.
All right, cool. We have 2 whole minutes. So I want to thank everyone for coming to this AMA, the audience for all their great questions. I want to thank Matt and Andy for providing us all of the Kubernetes answers and all types of other insight. So we're going to close off with just kind of plugging some things that we, the panelists, and me, the moderator, are excited about. As you know, I'm on the MinneStar board. And so what we have coming up is Minnebar15. This is our first time doing it virtually, given the circumstances. And so right now, the sessionizer is open, and it's your opportunity to present some sessions, give some session ideas, and I hope you'll do that. Matt, did you have anything?
I don't think so. Just thanks so much to everybody for joining us and asking great sessions, and hope to meet some of you virtually at some of these upcoming events. So thank you.
Andy, any plugs?
Yeah, quick plug. Just we're always looking to hire at SPS. So if you're looking into new areas to expand, we'd look us up or hit us up on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. And then I would make a plug for Minibar. That's such an awesome local community event. And if you haven't gone, you should totally go. If you have ideas for things to share it. The Twin Cities community is just a great place to get back to. And it's a lot of fun. So give it some consideration if you haven't.
Sweet. All right, I'm going to put one more plug in because there's one whole minute. I'm also a co-founder of TechWitty, and Code Switch is a civic hackathon that's coming up. Codeswitch.mn is where you can go to sign up for that in September. All right, everyone, thank you so much. And I'm sure I'll see you online somewhere again.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.